Faith voices are calling for ecocide law. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Vatican Secretary of State, told world leaders at the United Nations Climate Conference COP27, that concrete decisions to address the climate crisis could no longer be postponed. What does that mean, and where can this be leading to? What are the concrete decisions, and how will they be implemented if they can no longer be postponed? How does that relate to the mark of the beast or Sunday law, and how might that affect you as well? In this video, we are going to break these things down so you know what to do, starting with the tablet. Vatican tells COP27 that climate action can no longer be postponed. Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin at the United Nations Climate Conference has told world leaders at COP27 that concrete decisions to tackle the climate crisis can no longer be postponed. He continued to say that Pope Francis said he hoped that steps forward are taken with courage and determination. Now, like myself, after hearing this, you might be wondering what exactly the concrete decisions are. Well, you will find out later on in this video. Pope Francis says that humanity has moral obligation to fight climate change. It is almost impossible for the Pope to make the connection between morality and climate change without mentioning his Laudato Si encyclical, in which he advocates designating Sunday as the universal day of rest in order to combat climate change. Pope Francis delivered a message at the conference on resilience of people and ecosystems under climate stress, which was sponsored by the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. According to the Academy's website, the conference aimed to bring researchers, policymakers and faith leaders together to understand the scientific and societal challenges of climate change and develop solutions for enabling resilient people and resilient ecosystems. Again, in a message to participants in the conference, Pope Francis said, "The Christian faith offers a particular contribution in lessening climate risks by reducing emissions." He added that the book of Genesis tells us that the Lord saw that all he had made was very good, Genesis 1 verse 31, and entrusted human beings with the responsibility of being stewards of his gift of creation, Genesis 2 verse 15. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus reinforces the goodness of the natural world by reminding us of God's care for all his creatures, Matthew 6:26 and 28-29. He also said that in light of these biblical teachings, then, care for our common home, even apart from considerations of the effects of climate change, is not simply a utilitarian endeavor but a moral obligation for all men and women as children of God. Pope Francis said, with this in mind, each of us must ask, what kind of world do we want for ourselves and for those who will come after us? The Pope always draws attention to his call for a Sunday rest by law whenever he connects biblical passages to his encyclical, and that is precisely what he is doing here. To help answer that question, he cited his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, on care for our common home. The Pope said addressing the climate crisis requires an ecological conversion marked by a change of mentality and a commitment to work for the resilience of people and the ecosystems in which they live. Religious, political, social and cultural leaders, he said, must work together to form courageous, cooperative, and far-sighted efforts to address the current crisis. Through the Pope, Satan is uniting the world leaders, the politicians and religious leaders to combat climate change. When the time comes and the religious side agrees to the Pope's agenda of making Sunday a day of rest to help reduce carbon emissions at least every Sunday, by the way, this is already gaining ground, the world leaders under the influence of Satan through the Pope, will accept it and implement it in their various countries. This way, all superpowers will accept Sunday as a universal day of rest because they will see it as a solution to climate change, but not just a ban from worship on Saturday and observe an unbiblical Sabbath, Sunday. Hence, if you do not follow the law, if you do not abide by the Sunday law, you will be seen as one that opposes the solution to the climate change problems and you will be persecuted. Now let's talk about the concrete decisions. The decisions and outcomes of COP27 include, but is not limited to, the process to come up with a framework to establish funds for loss and damage, collective implementation, cutting down fossil fuels to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, and reducing emissions. In order for these goals to be met, particularly the decision to implement them globally, a book called Faith Voices for Ecocide Law was launched at COP27. What is ecocide? Ecocide is the mass destruction of ecosystems. A panel of criminal and environmental lawyers from around the world has created a legal definition for ecocide as the basis of a push to criminalize mass damage and destruction of ecosystems. According to this panel, ecocide is unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. We just noticed that COP27 is promoting Sunday worship by law. Now that they are calling for ecocide law, what could be the end results? Well, the ecocide law gives the country the power to imprison, fine, prosecute, persecute, and eventually put to death individuals who oppose their climate change policies. To avoid postponing the decisions to address the climate crisis and ensure the implementation of the plans globally, this ecocide law book is now being pushed to be recognized as a new international crime. International Criminal Court, ICC, is an intergovernmental organization and international tribunal that is governed by the Rome Statute. The court, as of releasing this video, currently has jurisdiction to prosecute 4 crimes: the crime of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. Pope supports classifying ecocide as an international crime. The International Criminal Court prosecutes some of the most heinous crimes. A new plan wants to add environmental damage or ecocide to its list of responsibilities. If successful, this would create an arrestable offense for anyone committing ecocide, and would make individuals responsible for acts or decisions that cause severe damage to the environment liable for criminal prosecution. Currently, companies found to have caused environmental harm are largely punished through fines or suing. Ecocide movement pushes for a new international crime. A growing number of world leaders, including Pope Francis and French President Emmanuel Macron, advocate making ecocide a crime before the International Criminal Court, to serve as a moral line for the planet. The Pope describes ecocide as the massive contamination of air, land and water, or any action capable of producing an ecological disaster. The Pope has also endorsed a campaign by environmental activists and legal scholars to make ecocide the 5th crime before the International Criminal Court in The Hague as a legal deterrent to the kinds of far-reaching environmental damage that are driving mass extinction, ecological collapse and climate change. The court can prosecute crimes committed by a national or state party. This would mean political leaders and corporate executives could face charges and imprisonment for ecocidal acts. Which also suggests that political leaders won't consent to being held accountable for the crimes their constituents have committed. As a result, they will enforce laws in their nations to make sure that people don't take part in activities that might be against the ecocide law. The campaign to criminalize ecocide is now moving from the fringe of advocacy into global diplomacy, pushed by a growing recognition among advocates and many political leaders that climate change and environmental causes are tied inherently to human rights and social justice. International lawyers propose ecocide to criminalize environmental destruction. Several international law experts are seeking to approve a new crime, ecocide, which will allow authorities to take action against environmental destruction. World Council of Churches in support of ecocide law. Pelle Thiel, from End Ecocide Sweden, says, protection of nature at the highest level is urgent for the transition to a sustainable society. Listen to this carefully. Faith traditions carry the hope that we can agree to this fundamental piece of legislation in time. This book is a very engaging collection of voices, and we hope it will be a useful resource for faith communities and others, to explore different perspectives and to unite in action and support for ecocide law. You can feel the movement to bring together churches and other religious convictions in support of the ecocide law. Not only that, again, Pelle Thiel, coordinator of Faith for Ecocide Law Initiative, further states, faith communities have a unique voice for the reverence of the living world. It is very encouraging and of great importance that this voice is being heard for a law with the power to protect nature at the highest level. Reverend Henrik Grape, coordinator of the World Council of Churches Working Group on Climate Change, says, when a broad ecumenical organization underlined that we need to revise our relationship to the creation, also recognized the need of laws to protect ecosystems, there is hope for a transformation to a more sustainable future. And if the World Council of Churches can reach out to other faith traditions to speak out for an ecocide law, governments around the world must listen. Here too, you can see how the image of the beast is being promoted. You can see the church influencing the state. K.G. Hammer, former Archbishop of the Church of Sweden, says, "To me as a Christian, working for ecocide law is the most important thing I can do. All Christian theology now must be eco-theology, to be relevant in the times we find ourselves in. As the well-known saying goes, history repeats itself. Romanism in the Old World, and apostate Protestantism in the New, will pursue a similar course toward those who honor all the divine precepts. Jesus was persecuted for his faith, the apostles, in Acts 5 verse 18 were persecuted for their faith, Paul and Silas were imprisoned in Acts 16 verse 23 because of their faith, and also in the era of the early Christians, many others were persecuted, imprisoned, or jailed, and put to death for their faith. This is going to happen again, especially during the time of the mark of the beast, which is the Sunday law. This means when Sunday is eventually enacted as the primary policy to combat climate change, and God's Sabbath commandment-keeping people refuse to honor Sunday, they will be perceived as climate criminals, as people destroying nature because they do not honor Sunday, and they will be prosecuted, imprisoned, and eventually be put to death by the authorities, after a series of punishments. Listen to this in the Great Controversy chapter 39. As the Sabbath has become the special point of controversy throughout Christendom, and religious and secular authorities have combined to enforce the observance of the Sunday, the persistent refusal of a small minority to yield to the popular demand will make them objects of universal execration. It will be urged that the few who stand in opposition to an institution of the Church and a law of the state ought not to be tolerated, that it is better for them to suffer than for whole nations to be thrown into confusion and lawlessness. This argument will appear conclusive, and a decree will finally be issued against those who hallow the Sabbath of the fourth commandment, denouncing them as deserving of the severest punishment and giving the people liberty, after a certain time, to put them to death. The good news is, you still have time to get yourself prepared and be fully ready to endure this time of trouble that is coming upon the true children of God. This video on top will teach you how to avoid the mark of the beast and survive the Great Tribulation, so watch that one next.